SWAT had to use every ounce of force they could to stop what Michigan Muslim was doing to neighbors. Time and time again, Muslim migrants keep proving that they have little intentions of assimilating into Western civilization after fleeing their third-world country crap holes. As America continues to be stunned over the news of a Somali cop murdering a Minnesota white woman in cold blood, now another horrifying story is emerging about what a Michigan Muslim did to his neighbors, that predictably the liberal media is trying to bury. According to local reports, who are the only ones reporting on this story, authorities sent a SWAT team to raid Abdul Latif Ketchman's apartment, after the Muslim kept continuously threatening to kill his neighbors unless they converted to Islam. The Muslim first began tormenting and traumatizing several of his neighbors at their shared complex back in January, where he attacked a male neighbor with a crowbar, telling him to bow down before his God, Allah, and convert. Abdul was charged with assault with a dangerous weapon and unlawful intent, but the charge did little to deter Abdul's murderous plans, as he'd step his violent antics a step further a short time later. In a separate incident several months later, Abdul tried to force himself into the home of a different neighbor, where he attempted to break into the apartment to kill a woman by beating the neighbor's doorknob off with a crowbar. After authorities received a call from the frantic woman whose life was being threatened, authorities knew they couldn't take any chances, and showed up in full SWAT gear in preparation for the worst. For several hours Abdul would taunt and play games with police officers, with one of the officers being forced to shoot a bullet into the Muslim's hip to force him into submission. In a courtroom before a judge, several witnesses, including 7 police officers, went into detail about the bizarre things they witnessed as they answered the call to find Abdul swinging around swords and demanding that the police watch him wash his genitals. Michigan Live reported. Pittsfield Township, Me, a man taunted police officers by waving and rubbing together the edges of knives in a small Ypsilanti apartment before he was shot by a member of Washington Metro SWAT in a January encounter, police testified Thursday, July 20. 2 cases against Ketchman, 33, of Ypsilanti were bound over to circuit court following preliminary examinations Thursday at Washtenaw County's 14A1 District Court. Ketchman initially faced charges of first-degree home invasion, carrying a dangerous weapon with unlawful intent and malicious destruction of a building costing $20,000 or more in damage for the incident on January 13, 2017. Things went horribly for Abdul Latif Ketchman in court, where he faced 14 new charges related during his encounter with police, including 7 counts of felony assault and 7 counts of resisting, obstructing or assaulting a police officer, Michigan Live reported. When neighbors who were attacked took the stand, that's when the courtroom was able to listen to the level of crazy they were dealing with, before the SWAT team arrived to remedy the situation. He was saying, "I'm going to kill you," Emerald Cox testified. Cox went on to say that she encountered Abdul several times, where he came banging on her door during Christmas and accused her of spying on him. From there, things got more insane in the courtroom, as several officers testified about what they witnessed after arriving the scene. Officer Tommy Porter was one of the 6 law enforcement officers who testified, where he said that Abdul opened the apartment door, but was keeping one arm hidden from them. "I asked him to see his hands multiple times," Porter said. "I could see his left hand and at one point, he props his right hand on the top of the door, and at that point, that's when I noticed he had, what, looked like a kitchen knife in his hand." The 2 officers drew tasers, but Ketchman slammed the door, Porter said. Several police officers fired tasers when Abdul opened the door, but he quickly slammed the door again. It wasn't until higher-ranking officers arrived on scene that they were finally able to force their way into the apartment, where Abdul continued his little games, locking himself in a back bedroom. Periodically Abdul would crack open the door enough so the officers could see him waving around the swords. He'd open the door and then he'd close it and open the door. "It was like he was playing with us," another officer said. Finally a negotiation team was called to the scene, where Detective William Stanford the first to enter the apartment as a crisis negotiator, according to court testimony. Lengthy attempts to end the situation peacefully were made, but Abdul kept denying orders while waving around his sword. Finally, the SWAT team was forced to engage, where a projectile with a foam tip was fired at the Muslim. But the round had little effect on the rabid Muslim, and finally, a member of the SWAT team was assigned to take him out with lethal force if necessary. Michigan Live went on. A less lethal weapon that uses projectiles with foam tips was fired once at Ketchman to get SWAT members into the apartment. But it didn't seem to have an effect on Ketchman, SWAT member and Ann Arbor police officer Andrew Vayner testified. When Ketchman opened the door with a knife and sword over his head, 2 SWAT members deployed their less lethal weapons. At the same time, Washtenaw County Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Dresser, a member of SWAT assigned to use lethal force that day, fired a shot with his Glock, members testified. After we pushed into the room and confronted Mr. Ketchman, he was standing in the doorway. He lunged at us. He was with 6 feet at least. There was no cover between us and I did fire, Dresser said. Eventually, Ketchman realized he'd been shot in the hip and agreed to come out to get medical attention, SWAT members said. Once Abdul realized he'd been shot in the hip, he finally agreed to come out in order to receive medical attention. Abdul is scheduled for pretrial hearings in both matters in Washtenaw County Trial Court on August 30th, where he is being held on $100,000 bond in the home invasion case. Thankfully, no one was killed by this feral Muslim, thanks to the quick actions of these highly trained police officers. Despite the propaganda that liberals will continue to spew about Islam being a religion of peace, we'll continue hearing incidents like this until every last Muslim is rounded up and deported back to the Middle East where they belong. How many more Americans have to die before enough is enough? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe Breaking News 365 channel. Goodbye and see you again.